What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Coinist podcast, the conversations that you can't miss as a crypto investor or trader. I know there's a lot of traders out there as well. Thank you, first off, before I get into any of this, for anyone that watched or listened or downloaded the last episode with Willie. We did 10,000 downloads in the first episode of July, and I am pumped for season 2. Today's episode is going to be a lot of fun, too. It's a little bit of a different flow. I'll get to that guest next, but in the following week, I'm going to talk to one of the most interesting VCs, I think, in the space. He actually coined the term crypto assets. I think a lot of you guys are going to enjoy that one. Some of you might know who I'm talking about. And then the week after that, I'm talking with a trading firm that most of you probably don't know about, a quant trading firm, and they're also launching their own exchange with products that are fascinating that I know for a fact aren't out there right now. So it's a first for all the traders that want to learn about these new products they're going to be able to trade. And then also you get a sneak peek into a trading firm that is kind of has its hands in everything happening in the space, but you probably don't know about. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting conversations I've had all year. So the next 2 episodes are going to be huge. I don't want you to miss them. Make sure to smash subscribe if you're not already on iTunes, Spotify, or if you watch here on YouTube. The conversation today is actually a bit of a change of pace. So I've been talking with a lot of analysts. We talked to a couple exchange operators as well and some fund managers. Today, in the spirit of the World Series of Poker, I know the poker community is it's a fun time to be tracking poker, playing poker right now. And since there's such a massive crossover of poker players and also people that spend a lot of time in crypto and invest in Bitcoin and invest in other crypto assets, I figured having a conversation with one of the poker legends, Doug Polk, one of the most winningest heads-up players of all time. He's a bracelet holder. He has done incredible things in that game and also spends a fair amount of time on crypto as well. So we talk about why there are so many poker players in crypto. I bet some of you guys watching this are poker players right now. And then also kind of the perfect synergy of risk that a lot of players were able to see that they could have an edge here early. And the more interesting topic and narrative that I don't think gets enough credit is poker players probably understood the value prop and the necessity of Bitcoin and being able to have your money wherever you go in the world, have liquidity. And then in 2017, 2018 happens. A lot of them, since they were already in it, got to also see the wealth, the store of value, and also kind of the increased value that happened by chance as well. So I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode. It's a bit of a change of pace from what we've been doing, but Doug is very entertaining and obviously one of the most respected and successful poker players of all time too. So I think you guys are going to enjoy. I had a lot of fun with this conversation looking at kind of the crossover of poker and crypto. Before we get into this episode, I do have one quick message from the sponsor who makes this possible, and that's Bybit Exchange. I already have a promotion going with them where everyone gets $10 just for signing up on the link below. So if you go right down below this video, if you're listening on iTunes, it's trading.bybit.com/venturecoinist. If you do that and check it out, you'll get a free $10 just for using my link. And because I know everyone's going to enjoy using this platform, you can trade Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP, EOS, all with leverage, right? No overload, working on a ton of different things. They're actually going to integrate TradingView next week as well. So everyone out there that uses TradingView charts, they're going to have Bybit on them next. BitMEX is really the only perpetual and derivatives exchange that has that. Bybit is next. You need to have an account with Bybit. And if you don't already, just to incentivize you even more, because I know you guys are going to like it, I have convinced them to let me give away $100 every single episode they sponsor. So the next episode that comes out, not today, you still have time, sign up using the link right below this YouTube video. If you're listening somewhere else, just go over to my YouTube and click the link right below. Sign up using my link, and in the next video, I'm going to announce the winner right here. So the winner will get $100 deposited straight into your account, $100 in Bitcoin. So you can also get a little bonus just for using my link. So check it out. That's how much I know you guys are going to enjoy that platform. XRP, EOS, Bitcoin, ETH, all with leverage, no overload. They also have a 24/7 support, so you're not just screwed if you have a question with their platform. Telegram is super active. I know you guys are going to enjoy it, and the $100 is a nice little bonus, a way to say thank you to everyone that's been listening. So go check it out. Link is in my YouTube. If you're listening anywhere else, check out the YouTube. Link is right below. Get signed up on Bybit. Thank you, Bybit. And without further ado, let's get into the show. This one was so much fun. A nice change of pace, entertaining episode. Thanks for coming on, Doug. This was fun. Enjoy your weeks, and I will see you guys soon. A little bit of a switch up with the flow. I've had on CZ, Arthur Hayes. We've been talking with some exchanges and hedge funds and different traders to get a feel for all the traders out there listening, trying to get an edge or get different perspectives in the market. I think this episode is going to be helpful anyways, though. It's a different perspective, but there's so much crossover with the poker community and with crypto investing that I thought it'd be a great idea to have on Doug Polk, one of the winningest heads-up players of all time, and he's also interested in the crypto markets. This should be a fun discussion. Thanks for coming on, Doug.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to be here. And yeah, you talk about some of the other guests that you've had on recently. Should have a little bit of a different flavor here today, I think.
No, it'll provide value, I'm sure of that, or at least entertainment. I appreciate you coming on, man. There's so many people that are focused on, what the big players are doing or what exchanges are doing. And I think this is going to give a really nice perspective because I know you don't come from a trading background. You come from obviously a poker background. So I think it'll be a lot more relatable. And I still think there's going to be a lot of good things to touch on here. The first thing I want to hit on is everyone asks the question on podcasts nowadays, how'd you get into crypto? And it's such a generic question and followed up by the answer. But I do want to ask you this, and I usually avoid it, but because so many poker players, it seems, or at least the ones that I've talked to, it's like they stumbled across crypto because they had to be paid out in it a couple of years ago, and then 2017 happens, and now all of a sudden they have this massive amount of Bitcoin, or because they understood probabilities and it was kind of a similar game to play. So how'd you get into crypto, and have you seen that as well among your friends or among the poker community? How did most people get in here? Why is there such a large poker community and crossover in crypto?
Sure. So for those of you guys who don't know, there really is, what you're saying is true, that there's a very large crossover of poker players in crypto. In fact, if you're a poker player, at some point in the last few years, you had to decide, like, are you on the bandwagon or not? And so when you bring up cryptocurrency in the poker world, it's a very decisive issue. Like, half the table will love it, half the table will be like, I swear to God, if you say Ethereum again, I'm going to kill you. It's like, it's a real hit or miss, right? But a lot of the people really jumped onto it. And so for me personally, at least, I was fortunate to kind of get involved a little bit on the earlier side. I think early 2014 or so was around when I got involved. And I forget like what the exact moment that I learned about it was. It may have been that some online processors were already starting to think about Bitcoin, or I know that there was a poker site called Seals with Clubs that was the first one to accept Bitcoin. It was a Bitcoin only site. But basically, because money is so important, liquidity is so important when you're a poker player, being able to bring money to whatever country you're in or whatever site you want to play at, it's important to have money, that isn't kind of tied up through conventional banking and all that type of infrastructure, because it's slow, they can confiscate it, all these issues, right, that as a poker player suck. And so when I first started to hear about it, I read about it on the forums, online, people talking about it. And I forget if like maybe the first time I purchased it was something poker related, or maybe just having heard about it, I got into it. But basically, the community started to talk about this a long time ago. This is not something that's like new within that community. Now, for me specifically, around the same time, I started to learn about the dice sites, which were like, Just Dice, I think was the first one by Douglas back in the day. And then Satoshi Dice, I think was around like in the same time frame. Since then, there have been tons of different dice sites. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, basically the way the dice sites work were people would provide the bankroll, and then the site would allow gambling, and then the investors who put up the bankroll would get a cut of the profits. So basically, you got to be the house. Now, as a gambler, I've never gotten to be the house, and this was pretty exciting. All of a sudden, like, I could actually be part of like the casino administering the bets or whatever, at least supplying the liquidity to administer the bets. So basically, I put bankrolls onto these sites where people were gambling Bitcoin back and forth, and essentially, I actually had an edge being part of the house. So that's kind of like the first reason I bought like any real amount of Bitcoin was to be the bankroll on the sites. And that's kind of got me started, man. I made some through that. And then that kind of like, I was on more of those sites. Before I knew it, I was kind of really involved. And then during that process, the price started to rise. And I hadn't really thought about that. Like, I just thought about like sort of this whole economy of being able to invest in the house and, the liquidity side of it. And then the price started going up, and I was like, oh, you can make money like that too. Yeah, that's kind of how it happened for me, and how I started to get involved. I know several other poker players got involved for a lot of the same reasons, just being able to back these dice sites. And I think as a professional gambler, when you see the opportunity for edge, right? Because edge is so important in gambling and probably in trading as well, right? You want to create edge. And so when you're used to like, how can I get an edge when I'm betting, and you see this opportunity, then you kind of step over. So as far as that's my background with it. But as far as the community goes, I think that's how the poker community first started to get their toes wet, to dip their toes into the pool with Bitcoin and things like that. And then once it really started to surge in 2017, like everyone in the poker community specifically was talking about it, and a lot of them started to get involved, it had been around for a while, so they were familiar with it. And another great thing about the poker community is that they're very willing to take risk.
Yeah.
And you need to be willing to take risk if you're going to get involved in this space. So that's kind of like the perfect storm, right? You have this group of people, they need liquidity. They don't like these institutions. They're willing to take risk. They're looking for edge. I mean, this is really kind of why it lends itself so well, poker over into Bitcoin.
Yep. And the important thing, or I think the unique thing about poker with crypto as opposed to any other group that got into crypto, is like you said, it wasn't necessarily the price rise or the 2017 bubble or bubbles before it that got you in or got anyone else in. It was more of kind of a necessity. And the funny thing is that's almost the use case of Bitcoin already, as people kind of view it as a long-term thing of, if you're traveling a lot and you can't access, I have a debit card or a credit card and I go to China or I go to London, all of a sudden that card gets shut down. You can't have that as a poker player. So it's funny, like, and I won't name names, but there's people that I've spoken to, there's people that I work with, there's people that I've traded with, that it seemed like, and you might have a similar story, it seemed like they almost were into crypto by necessity. And then all of a sudden 2017 happens and they wake up to, holy shit, now I have this big pile of money. Maybe I should actually learn about what this Bitcoin thing is.
Yeah, certainly the case. It's also going to matter which kind of sphere you're in, right? So I know a lot of the guys that got involved on the earlier side of poker players, but whenever you have a bubble that's that huge, there are many people that were not on the early side, right? So I'm sure that there are groups that got in late and got kind of crushed by the crash that happened last year. But certainly the poker community embraced Bitcoin much earlier than most other communities, out of need, out of necessity, and then also, of course, out of speculation. I think there was a lot of speculation as to the future of Bitcoin for a long time. There's this thread. There's a poker forum called 2+2. And they've had this thread on like what's happening with Bitcoin, and it's been there for years. And it's just so funny because the price is always shifting, but the conversation is always the same. This is either total nonsense or it's the future. and like it's just funny. It's like price at 200, it's nonsense. Price is at 1,000, it's the future or it's not. And it's just like it's swinging around, but that conversation always stays the same. And that does kind of mirror I think society, the way society looks at Bitcoin. It's just that the community of people that actually do believe in its purpose continues to grow. But it's a bit of a different discussion.
Yeah. You brought up edges with that when you were explaining how someone like you or other poker players could recognize that there was probably an opportunity here. I know that years ago, people talk about the golden age or kind of the easiest time to be in poker, whether or not the poker dream is still alive. What time period was that when you would say poker was the easiest? And was that when you got into poker? What I'm trying to draw a parallel to is a lot of people got into crypto, whether they're finance people or whether it was by chance, because they saw that they could have an edge here. They saw that it was an easiest table. And a lot of people probably got into poker for the same reason. Did you get into poker for that reason? Was it like kind of a gold rush of, oh my God, everyone's getting rich off this? Or did you get in after?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm sure that the easiest hand of poker I ever played was the first one. So it's hard for me to graph that, right? Like if I had to graph how close we got to playing like a perfect strategy, how close are we now versus like how close were we at the start? Well, obviously we're much closer now, but we still probably have some ways to go. Yeah. I think in the last let me actually take a step back. So when online poker first started to emerge, we're talking like 2004 or 5-ish. Basically at that point, obviously it was the easiest because people had not yet really gotten to test their strategies. It wasn't well known what the best strategies were. And as it started to become popularized around the era, the Chris Moneymaker era, where basically this guy won a satellite into the main event and then won the main event for $1 million or however much it was at that point. Basically, online poker had not really grown to its full size yet, so it was much smaller. So it's again smaller market. It was less
Mhm.
efficient. People were less good. They were less able to play like theoretically correct poker. And then there was really this boom that happened from like '03 to '07 in that time frame where it just ramped up huge and it started to get extremely large. 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. That era was probably like the absolute peak, but it got a lot harder over those years because now there was a lot of money at stake and people that were smart were kind of figuring out the ways to make that money. And what were some of the optimal strategies started to kind of emerge. You started to see a lot more data available. You started to see people being able to look at the best player, look at how they played, study their strategies, and kind of copy them. Because at least with trading, a lot of what you're doing is private, right? Unless you're moving on a very large scale, what you're doing is going to be private. So people don't know what the best guys are doing necessarily. But in poker, that's not the case. If you're playing the highest stakes, everyone can see you. Everyone can see what you're doing. Everyone can see the amounts that you like to bet. Everyone can see the kinds of hands you like to make moves with. So I would say from 2000, I say 2004 to 2007, there was kind of a gold rush ish. 2007, 2010, it was kind of like absolute height of the poker boom. 2011 was when Black Friday happened, which for those of you guys who don't know, basically the U.S. government made it illegal to play online poker. Um, kind of, I mean, they basically enforced the Wire Act, which basically they went after any company that was allowing U.S. citizens to gamble online. The three major poker sites, anyway. Sorry, the three biggest companies. So they essentially enforced uh, law that was already written. And the three biggest sites, PokerStars, Full Tilt Poker, and Ultimate Bet, they all went under, and the government seized their funds, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that was the day where most remaining companies decided, okay, we're not gonna mess with the U.S. market because the U.S. government can come after us and they'll hijack all this money. So at 2011, there was a real decline in the overall ecosystem of online poker. And I know this has been a long-winded answer to your question, but the
No,
point
it's
is,
good.
when I got involved, it was around 2007 or so. So I would say it was like towards the end of like that kind of gold rush and more and getting a little bit more towards like just like the peak of the boom. But unfortunately, when you get started in poker, you don't have any money, right? Like I was a
Yep.
kid, I started with like 10 or $20 or whatever it was that, and I lost my first 5 or 6 deposits and I was just a fish and I put $20 online and it finally clicked and I finally started to make stuff happen, right? So I wasn't really in a position to be able to capitalize on that. I didn't really become like a high stakes player until after it was already kind of in decline. And what you talked about earlier, that I mainly played heads up poker, which is one-on-one poker. That game type was really, it was not popular when I came all the way up. And it's funny, you'd think that'd be popular at one-on-one poker. It's like classic, like Wild West. Like you look them in the eye. Well, it's online, so it's not like that. But the point remains, like it's man versus man. But that wasn't super popular. Like I think, despite reaching the top of that, I didn't make more than a few $1 million doing so. So, anyway, to kind of sum up your question, I kind of came in the tail end of the rush, but I wasn't able to build up to being a high stakes player until after things had kind of already been on the decline.
Okay. And so what do you think was the biggest factor of and still is the biggest factor of people getting better? Is it more that you can just play more hands every single day because, people can 20 table playing online versus in the past you couldn't do that. You'd have to you could play a cash game 12 hours a day, but you're still just playing, whatever amount of hands that is, as opposed to now you can play thousands of iterations. A 16-year-old could have actually seen more hands than a 30-year-old pro. And then, or is it just that kind of strategies are getting better and people are learning from each other? Those might go hand in hand, but we see so many similarities with crypto. I mean, finance and investing strategies existed, but it's still, I would say, relatively an inefficient and new market because we aren't seeing how people react to, at the very, even as early as last year, 2017, a company launches a new website and people buy. Like, does that change the fundamental value of the token, or do people eventually learn after 3 months, okay, a company launching a new website does not change this token's value? So what do you think is the biggest thing for poker players, and
Ouch! There
why?
are going to be a lot of upset companies to hear that.
or a lot of new
Yeah,
traders, I
no,
guess.
yeah, there you go. So I think it's certainly how far strategies have evolved over the last several years, I've never really been much of a believer that volume does almost anything for you at all. Because here's the thing, we can do things with high volume and not learn anything about them. We really can. And we can focus on the wrong aspects. We can focus on the things that were irrelevant to the result, right? Like to give a simple poker analogy, let's say I got pocket aces and I lost, right? Aces is the best hand. Well, you couldn't draw away from that. Well, you know what? You shouldn't have played aces. No, of course you should have played aces. So,
Yeah.
so there are people, and that's a very simple example. That's easy to see why that's wrong. But there are so many examples in poker where the right or wrong thing can happen not based on what you did, whether what you did was right or wrong, that it convolutes it and makes it tricky. It makes it hard to discern what was right, what was wrong, why, which factors are more important. And so, like, as a good poker player, you learn how to evaluate the importance of these factors and try and make an educated guess based around what you've learned to be true. But the thing is, in the last several years, the strategies have changed to be more in line with what solvers, or these like programs, basically try to solve for a simulated version of poker. And they're not going to be exactly correct because of a variety of factors that are going to be too technical for me to even want to get into here. But basically, now we see the general themes of what strategies should look like, in a toy model version of the game. And so because of this, it's a lot easier now for people to get good at poker. If you want to get good at poker, you can join a training site. I'd have to recommend my own training site, upswingpoker.com. Got to get the plugin. But you could join a training site. You could get a solver, and you'd be good. You'd be at least decent at poker. Whereas back in the day, it wasn't like that. You had to figure stuff out. You had to see like what strategies were superior, what worked, what didn't work. You had to use your own judgment. So I think that now poker is a lot tougher because strategies have evolved. We have a better idea of what is correct, and we're seeing that kind of play out across the space.
So with that, as kind of strategies have evolved in poker, as well as they have in crypto, I think one of I shouldn't say funniest, one of the things that it's interesting or fascinating, I should say, to observe in 2019 is people getting into crypto because it was probably easier. And, they get here, it's an easier table. They say, I'm the best trader in the world. Look, I'm making money. And then all of a sudden it's that variance, like he suggested with pocket aces, where, they wake up in 2018, February, March rolls around, and my pocket aces aren't working anymore. Or maybe, I shouldn't be playing pocket deuces every single time and taking every single trade. I know that you took a little bit of a break from crypto, and I think the reason I also want to do this podcast is it's probably a good representation of a lot of retail investors that weren't full-time people. You focus a lot more on creating content in poker and kind of do crypto on the side. You took a pretty big break from crypto, I believe. Are you back now, or were you just doing it more passively, or kind of what's your view on how active are you in crypto investing right now?
Okay, so there's the content side, and then there's the investing side. From a content standpoint, I more or less stopped doing videos for the last 6 months to 12 months. I mean, I've done like one here and there. And the reason is because if I make one now, way less people watch. People are just not interested. And so that's not, and I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, you're just being a fair weather crypto YouTuber. It's only making it for the views. Like, yeah, I make videos for people to watch them. I'm sorry. Like, if that makes me a bad guy, then like, so be it. Like, you know what? If when Bitcoin went down, everyone flocked to YouTube to watch videos, I'd make it when it went down. I would, because like that's when the audience is there, right? Like I make content. If you make content on the internet, you make it for people to watch it, whether you want to pretend you don't or not. If no one listened to this podcast, we probably shouldn't be making it, right? So the point is, like, you need people to actually be there and watch the content. And what I found was when Bitcoin was getting rocked, no one wanted to watch. No one wants to see, funny jokes about them losing money. No one wants to watch like what happened that like, lost them more money. People kind of want to just like go into their shell or whatever. So sort of like the repercussion of that was I just didn't really feel like the value was there for me to make videos. When I make videos, I make like $100 on ad revenue or something. I'm not making it for the money. I'm making it to build an audience and like kind of promote my business and promote me and whatever. So if the audience isn't there, then I'm really not looking to make a lot of content. And I think that's fair. From an investing side, I haven't really changed my stance too much. I'm less invested now than I was before, but not because I don't believe in the cause. It's because I believe in the IRS, and that was unfortunate. what happened in the last year or two, but
Yeah.
here we are. And so, um, no, like I don't think that my stance has really changed. And my stance wasn't, if for people that actually followed kind of what I recommended, like overall, I recommend taking like a pretty balanced approach and being more Bitcoin than altcoins. I've never really been a Bitcoin maximist. I've never been a Bitcoin maximalist. I've also never been like fully all in on the shitcoins. Now, I did reach a point in early 2018 when a lot of the shitcoins were popping off, and I had a bunch of them where I was like, oh my God, I've got like more goddamn Bitclave than Bitcoin. What's going on right now? So, like I've been in there swinging the bat, but I don't think that my stance has changed too much. I'm more of just a long-term bull on the entire space. I think that cryptocurrency makes sense. Having governments control our money supply does not make sense. And I think that there will be more and more demand for that as we move forward. Because of that, and removing banks and these third-party institutions from controlling our money, because there's so much value in that, I believe in the long-term success of it. I've never been a trader. I've never been kind of like, day to day moving my positions around, and like very rarely have I ever shorted anything. Maybe Ripple occasionally when it just gets to be a little too much for me. But I'm not really making moves very frequently. I'm just kind of like a long-term bull. And I think eventually, probably Bitcoin, but the entire cryptocurrency space is going to win out.
Okay. And that answer makes a lot of sense, definitely on the content side, but the investing side is what I wanted to really hit on, because I think, you represent, and you probably have, you spent more time in crypto and understanding crypto than the average person. But I think the average person would probably have a pretty similar story of maybe they just track it less because prices are down, or, the content and the investing thing, it's funny. There's not too much of a difference. Now that price is going back up, it's like people are willing to talk about it more. So if you bring it up at the poker table, maybe it's not, four guys saying, fuck off, Doug. They actually do want to talk about it, and they actually do want to put some more money into it. Like, I guess, do you see it come up in your community more, or among your friends that were invested? Or are people a lot more cautious to be invested or long Bitcoin?
Yeah, no, maybe it's not four anymore. It's just three. No, so I don't know. The overall attitude has changed, right? And so I think, like, for example, you say the term ICO, and you say it like 24 months ago versus 12 months ago versus now, and the attitudes are very different amongst
Sure.
all those time periods, right? Um, and some of it isn't even because like people's stance on how valuable they are has changed, which they're not very valuable. Most of them are going to be scams. They're going to end up going to nothing. But just like how profitable those scams can be has even gone down tremendously, right? So I think that overall the attitudes have shifted towards being more realistic. Like, should we really attach $10 billion valuation to this token that some guy says is going to be really, really big? Probably not, unless it's certain ones, I guess. But it's changed a little bit, and so I think overall people, when everything is just skyrocketing and everyone's making money, you think back to the actual peak, right? 20K Bitcoin. It just seems so easy for people to make other plays. Well, I made the Bitcoin play, that worked. So maybe I should try this one. Maybe I should try this IC. Maybe I should try this token or this alt or this would, it's a lot easier to justify your more aggressive moves when you're making money. And so I think we're kind of at a point now where people have gotten a taste of being significantly burned, and seeing what that's like. And they've also had a taste of the absolute euphoria of what went down. If you were someone that got involved, let's just say like 2 years ago or before, to where I think we're still going to see a lot of aggressive plays, but we're also not going to see people with quite that same level of nothing can touch me that we saw happen at absolute peak mania of January 2018.
Yeah, at least I hope not. I think maybe some people will as we get back into euphoria. I don't think people's emotions will change, but I think definitely the people that are around, they won't fall into the same trap. There's two things I want to bring up here, and the second thing is TA, but I'm going to save that for a second. The first thing I'm going to ask about is for people, especially for you, right? You talk about people that invested or were long Bitcoin, or anyone that was in when Bitcoin hit its peak, and now in 2018 you have 12 months of a downtrend, and they have that first kind of experience of getting burned. I'm going to relate it back to poker. Do you have like a telling moment I think a lot of people probably went through this last year of bankroll management in their portfolio of saying, wow, I was overexposed and I'm down, 40, 50, 75% or whatever that number is. Now I need to think about, having some in cash or at least some kind of rebalancing or some kind of system to make sure I'm not 90% in alts. Do you have a defining moment in your poker career where you said, oh my God, this, I need to change this? Or what's kind of the bankroll crossover of crypto and poker?
Right. So in poker, you have to have good bankroll management. Doesn't matter how good you are. When, even if you're playing games, you're always a winner. If you only have 5 buy-ins, shit can happen. Shit can happen, and all of a sudden you have nothing, and you have to rework your way up. So, it's not like most players have good bankroll management or most top players have good bankroll management. They all do. You have to have good bankroll management. So typically in poker, you're putting between like, if it's like a relatively bad game, you might put like 0.5% to 1% of your bankroll on the table. If it's a decent to good one, maybe 1 or 2%. And if it's wait, what are you drinking LaCroix?
Not LaCroix.
Oh, okay. I was drinking the same one. That would have been funny. Anyway, moving on. So typically like 1 to 2% of in like a decent game. And if it's like the absolute bee's knees of games, maybe you putting like 4%, or I can't even recommend 5%. Like in
and when you say good game, I want the listeners to understand this. You're not talking about you having fun at that game. It's more of, what's your edge in that game, I'm assuming, right? When you say good game, it means you sat down at a table where you think you have an edge or you think you can actually eat, as opposed to sitting down with 4 of your friends who also might be top players in the world, right? Like
right.
It's kind of like your conviction in a trade. It's the same way as when you sit down, what's your conviction that you can actually win at that table?
Right. Yeah. No, it's the overall strength of the table at poker, right? Like if you have 1 bad player and 6 good ones, it's not a great table. But if you're at a table with 4 bad players, 1 decent one and 1 good one, well, you're probably doing just fine here if you're a good player, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of all in that range, and it also depends on your appetite for or your tolerance for volatility. There are some people that they can lose half their net worth and they're fine because they're still them. I think overall I'm pretty good with that. Like I've had some seriously crippling career downswings in my life, and I've always come out of it. So I think there are people that those guys can take bigger risk because they're fine if they lose. If you're someone who knows that losing a quarter of your net worth is going to really upset you, then you can't ever take 3 to 4% of yourself in games because 3 to 4% of your net worth in games. Because if you did that, well, what happens if 4 or 5 of them in a row go badly? And that will happen. Well, then you're there, right? So you kind of have to know like what's your own tolerance level for this type of volatility, and then also like you have to be honest, like how good is this spot? Because there are some people that lie to themselves. I'm sure this happens in trading. I don't trade, but I can only imagine there are guys who every trade's the best trade, right? Like this is the one they have to make, but it's not, right? Like there are ones that are going to be much better. And if trading is like poker, well, most trades that are profitable, probably slightly profitable, and then there are less good ones, and then there are even less great ones. I'm making that up. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong.
No, that's entirely accurate.
I imagine that's similar, right? So, you have to learn how to be honest with yourself. Like, is this a good spot or not? How good? And judge based around that when you're kind of setting your bankroll. And I have a quick story that I wanted to tell. This is when I should have known that the peak was in. Okay, this is the moment I should have known. It was January of 2018. Maybe it was February, but it was in that time frame. And I went to the Rio. And for those of you guys that don't know, the Rio is the home of the World Series of Poker. Okay, this is the home of poker. And I went to the valet and I pulled up, and the guy said, "I know you." And I was like, yeah, I play poker. He's like, "Oh, no, I don't follow. You're the Bitcoin guy, right?" And I was like, "We're in trouble."
Oh, gosh.
We're in trouble if I'm pulling up to the World Series of Poker home central base and I'm the Bitcoin guy. We got problems here.
And who knew that? You said the valet guy knew that?
The valet guy. He was like, "Yeah, I love Bitcoin." And like, he didn't follow poker at all. It was too funny.
That's insane. I have nearly the exact. I've definitely been at an airport. I don't know if this was the peak. This actually might have been like still Q1 2018 or like mid-year 2018. I was at an airport getting my bag, and I heard the drivers that sit there, whether they're limo drivers or taxi guys, and they were talking about investing in Bitcoin. And I was like, that's a little weird, but okay, just go on with my day. Yeah,
exactly.
When the valet or the drivers, the taxi drivers, little note for everyone out there listening: when that happens again, check the Blockfolio. Consider taking profits.
seems like it could be a reasonable spot to do so.
Yeah. All right. So the second thing I wanted to bring up there was you've mentioned this word, or maybe you've mentioned the topic without saying the word, of variance, right? So whether it's overconfidence or whether you get in these spots, and it happens in poker and it happens in trading. For crypto investors, it happened at the end of 2017, the beginning of 2018. Like you said, all of a sudden you wake up and your BitClave position is bigger than your Bitcoin position. And that's not because, with all due respect, it's not because you had some groundbreaking research that BitClave was the next Bitcoin and you had this awesome entry. It was literally just because things were euphoric, greed took over, and everything was running, 10, 20, 30x. I imagine that also happens in poker. Like if I log into Party Poker, whatever site I'm allowed to play here in the US, I can't play there. But if I played on whatever site I could, and I just, play pretty loose, I imagine I'll win some nights and I'll probably lose money, 4 or 5 other nights. But there's that concept of variance of, in a certain position, sometimes playing the perfect way will win, sometimes playing the perfect play will lose. There's a concept or a type of analysis in trading, though, technical analysis, in which traders can gain an edge or at least understand their probabilities for taking a position. And I've seen you on Twitter, and I think it's a fine position because a lot of the stuff out there is nonsense. But I've seen you on Twitter talk about how TA is total nonsense. And I'm kind of curious to dig in there. What are your thoughts on technical analysis?
Sure. So for starters, I think that like the exact quote is that the vast majority of it is total nonsense, and then there are slight edges that can be made in the remainder, or something to that degree. And well, let me start off. Let me just kind of start off with my general thoughts here. First off, I think that cryptocurrency specifically has so much insider trading going on. And there are very clear examples of this. I think back to what happened with Bitcoin Cash in late 2017, when all of a sudden, the day before the big Coinbase Bitcoin Cash announcement, Bitcoin Cash was going up. That had to be pure coincidence. No, that was inside information. And so there's a lot of this that happens. Like if you have the knowledge of what big players are going to do, you can absolutely make money if you trade off that information, right? So there are people making money trading from that type of information. And this is a zero-sum game, or maybe even slightly negative sum, because the houses take commission, or like the house, too much gambling world. But the platforms take commission, right? So it's basically slightly negative sum game. So that money comes from somewhere, and it comes from people like you who are trying to trade, or other people that people in that same boat that don't have that information. So basically, there are people with information that can trade around it, that can get a lot of value from the information that they have. And I'm sure that goes on all the time, constantly. And that edge is being created. So now you have people and their triangles going up against massive amounts of inside information. And I just don't see them winning that battle. I don't see those trends, the historical trends, end up mattering that much moving forward. I think a lot of it is just Monday morning quarterbacking, like looking at like what happened before and then assuming it's going to be right again. And I think that there's a ton of people just trying to basically build a following around this and then capitalize on it for financial gain, So when I see all that kind of stuff happening, I see people that are, just like trying to use this to sell stuff to their followers. It's one of those things where it's like, guys, I think a lot of this is just bullshit. Now, there are people that know what they're talking about. I am not qualified enough to discern the ones that are and the ones that aren't. But I'll tell you what, you get 100,000 traders making guesses, you're going to end up with 100 guys who look super smart, no matter what. Because if everyone's just guessing and then someone's right, well then, I mean, some people are going to be right. That's just the nature of it. That's just the way that things work. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they knew those things were going to happen, right? That was their guess. So I guess like my main thing I'm putting forward here is that I do think that most TA is nonsense. I do think that a lot of people that are kind of saying like this triangle indicates that this thing's happening with like 2 lines and then one the other way. I do think a lot of that is bullshit. That's probably not what a lot of your audience wants me to say. I don't know if I'm going to be popular here, but that's what I honestly think. I just think that a lot of it is nonsense.
No, I actually will agree with that, and whether or not the audience will. So there's 2 things I want to hit on there before we hit on the TA. The insider information, I'm glad you brought that up. So the reason, or something that completely exists in cryptocurrency or in the crypto markets, whether or not people want to admit it, is not even, we won't even talk about the dirtier side of maybe insider information, but let's just think about it as it's maturing, it's less mature than other financial markets. So there's not, necessarily a Bloomberg, and information isn't going out in milliseconds, and people trading on that, in large part because it's still retail driven. The vast majority of investors here are still retail. Yes, there's funds and VCs coming in, but it's still a lot of me and you and thousands of other people across the world chasing these things and buying these things. A lot of that's due to regulatory reasons, sometimes it's due to access, sometimes due to the custodial thing. So even if it is an insider information, let's say, for example, I'm going to use BitClave again. I don't even know what BitClave is, but you brought it up, so I imagine it's a token.
I'm going to get hammered for that one.
Well, I don't know what it is, so I can talk about it.
It's all good. Just roll with it.
So BitClave, let's say that you're a BitClave huge fan. You have a BitClave poster in your room. Every single night you tweet that BitClave's going to the moon for whatever reason, and you follow their Telegram actively. Now, let's say BitClave all of a sudden says they are actually have a partnership with Samsung. Whether or not it's true, it doesn't matter. They say they're going to have this partnership in their Telegram. There isn't right now like a Bloomberg that's aggregating, like let's say Samsung or Apple actually comes out with an earnings report. That information is relayed onto Bloomberg News, and there's a very structured way that public information for companies is relayed out. In milliseconds, people are trading on that, and quants are trading on that. In crypto, that still doesn't exist. Like BitClave can announce that in their Telegram, and maybe you and Johnny64 and Moonboy22 on Twitter are like, BitClave's the next thing, and they tweet to text three other friends, and they literally have an edge based on information asymmetry. Right, so some of it isn't even insider information, and I think that's how an edge can still exist for crypto. But specifically with the TA thing, I think a lot of what you said is true. Right, if there's 100,000 people guessing, yes, some of them are going to be right, and some of them are going to be right not even because their process is right, just because there's that many guesses. Right, one or two have to be right, and the price can only go up, down, or middle. So the one thing I wanted to ask is, what does a poker player use a solver for? Right, you get in certain spots and it's helping you kind of find your probability of playing a certain way or playing a certain hand. Can you describe a solver for people that haven't played poker? And that'll lead into my example for TA.
Sure. So a solver is essentially a piece of software that you input, both players, you input their range of hands, which means all the hands they could possibly have, like aces, kings, queens, whatever their range consists of. And then you give it a flop, the first three cards on the board, and then you give it what bet sizes it can use. So it could be like 1/3 of the pot or the full pot, or you can pick the sizes. And then using those things, the ranges and the bet sizes, it will compute what the optimal strategy is. Now, there's a little bit of an issue in that sometimes poker is not played so precise. Most people randomly will do things, and so their ranges pre-flop can be off, or sometimes, post-flop, you might want to use a different size than just a couple of set ones. So the main takeaway is it will give you a good idea as to what strategies will be most strong on certain textures given situations. And you can kind of make some estimates from there to know what the profitable moves are.
For sure. So the way that at least I view technical analysis, and I'm sure that Johnny22 and Moonboy22, whatever the examples I used, not everyone's going to agree with me on this. Listeners won't agree, and some Twitter people won't agree. It's a lot less about me drawing a triangle and saying it's going to break up here or it's going to break down here. But if someone is actually a full-time trader and has taken the time, in the same way that you have probably looked at a solver a lot more hours than me, if I'm a recreational player and I downloaded the solver once and understood my range in one spot, right? If someone is actually using TA appropriately and over thousands of iterations of maybe a scenario, of a pattern, or whatever it is the system they're using, they can have at least a probabilistic, if that's a word, a statistical understanding of what could happen in a certain scenario. And just because I say this looks bullish here, I'm expecting this to happen, and I'm wrong here, if I'm wrong, it doesn't mean that TA doesn't work, right? It does. That style of analysis, though, still gave me an edge. The same way, if you run that certain hand through a solver, your head's up against some guy, you have a lot more chips, your ICM's higher, whatever it is, you play the hand and you lose. It's not like solvers don't work, right? So that's kind of the only pushback I have there, at least the thing I wanted to explore with TA not working. I know a lot of it's nonsense, but I think there is definitely a value add if you apply it and view it as kind of a process of understanding probabilities, as opposed to this reading tea leaves and saying Bitcoin will go to 100K because of my triangle.
No, I like that analogy. I think it's good. So there's this thing that I think a lot of people make a mistake with in both trading and poker, and really anything when it comes to probability, where we look way too much at the results and not enough at the process that creates the prediction.
Sure.
And so it's easy to say, well, of course, like, this trade was good because it made money, right? It's easy to say
Yeah.
that poker hand was played well because I won. Like, it's easy to say stuff like
Yeah.
that, but it doesn't mean that. And that's one
Yep.
of the hardest things with new poker players is explaining to them, like, you can play like a goddamn idiot and still win, and it doesn't mean that it was a good thing. Like
Sure.
it's hard to like separate that. Like, you'll see people, they're like, but I won. Like, how can it be bad? So absolutely correct in that if you say, my, like, based on this set of factors that I'm analyzing, I'm predicting this to happen at like a set frequency, and you're wrong, doesn't mean anything. It's
Yeah.
about how are you doing in the long run. If you average all of those things over time, and it also, of course, matters like the probability in terms of like what you gain versus your risk, like risk reward ratio, right?
Sure.
Like, for example, if I could say, like, I think Bitcoin will be over $3,000 at this time next year, and like I'm probably going to be right,
Yeah.
but I couldn't get 1-to-1 on that bet, right? There's no way
Yeah.
I'd be able to get 1-to-1. So it's kind of irrelevant that I'm mainly right. It's like what's the risk reward ratio, and
Yep.
like that's or like in sports, right? If there is a good team and a bad team, and like I think the good team's going to win, it's like, oh, cool. That's just
Yeah.
like a really cool story like that. Yeah, awesome. You and everybody else also thinks that. But do you like them -8? Like, it's kind of like that. It's like you have to think about risk reward, and when you make a prediction, like, what are you really saying? Like, what are you really saying with this prediction? Like, how much of a limb are you really going out on? What do you gain if you're right, and that type of thing.
Sure. Yeah. The understanding, where would you be wrong? What is your reward? Like you said, your risk reward, and then expectancy. And the biggest thing is, and the reason I want to bring this up is because I think it's such an important topic to talk about, whether or not someone likes TA or loves TA or wants to use it to gain a following, like you said, or just complete whatever it is, wherever they fall on the spectrum. I think it's so important. Exact same way with poker, you'll never be able to understand its value that it provides to you or to anyone else without thousands of iterations and thousands of sample sizes. The same way, I couldn't go and play reckless at a poker table and say, I played great tonight, right? I have no idea whether or not I played great tonight until I'm in that spot 1,000 times and I actually understand what my EV is there. So just wanted to hit on that because I know there's a lot of people that don't like TA. And I think, honestly, I don't disagree with a lot of their views. But I think there is a value out there for
So
people that understand it.
let me
Go
ask
ahead.
you a question then here. So what are some of the most valuable metrics that you use when you're thinking about using technical analysis to try and create edge? Like, what are some of the things that, like, let's just say that you're a real casual trader. What are some of the warning signs when you see people tweeting about like this term or that term? You should be like, watch out, that stuff's kind of nonsense. Versus like, what are some things that maybe like the people that are more successful would actually use?
For sure. So I think the biggest red flag is always going to be certainty, right? So if someone tweets out, or I'm going to say tweets out because most people share information on Twitter, but if someone has a YouTube video or tweets that, based on this, right? If we have a golden cross on the 50 EMA and the 20 EMA, and last time Bitcoin did this, right? And it should rise, it has to rise $1,000. Like, unless there's a sample size of, I think any pointing to an indicator, and this is what happened last time, and this is what has to happen this time, I think is usually the biggest red flag of like just one sample size. The exact same way of anyone that understands mathematics and knowing that one sample size isn't a good foundation for an assumption. I think that's probably the biggest red flag. I think the other thing is probably the tea leaf example that I use. So anything really long term, sure, you can probably understand some kind of statistical probability of saying, based on how long the last Bitcoin trend was, you can guess how long, with a reasonable expectation, how long this Bitcoin trend was, and based on how much it gained percentage-wise, this is how much it can gain again. But really, I don't think there's an edge, and I know that this is what CNBC wants to hear. I know this is what gets a lot of retweets. If you say, like John McAfee says, if you say Bitcoin will be 100K in 2 years, right? Sure, you might be right, and you might get thousands of retweets and whatever it is if you're right. But I don't think there's any increase in edge by me saying Bitcoin will be at 25K by the end of 2019, even if I'm right. Like, there is no value add to me. I think the only value add you can have is if there's a pattern that I see, right? Price is at this and it crossed over some kind of psychological level, let's call it 5,100 like it did today. Based on price being able to cross over this daily level, what it's done 50 times in the past week, I can say with some kind of certainty, 60% of the time it was able to pop 2%. I'd be wrong if it dropped, $100. I'd cut my loss. That's a market structural change. So it's anything that's like gonna get a lot of engagement and tweets. I guess this is like a very vague way to say it. Anything that is tea leaves, a year out, big numbers, certainty, those are probably red flags. The non-sexy stuff is probably actually what helps, is probably the simplest way to put it.
That's awesome. And that also carries over to poker because, I do a lot of YouTube stuff for poker. And some of the people that watch that content, they joke because in a lot of spots, they're like, well, guys, like in this spot, you can raise, fold, or call. Like some of them, any of them are kind of good. And people are like, oh, thanks to the advice, Doug. So I can do all of the possible options. Thanks, man. Appreciate that. And, like they'll troll about it because it's like, what kind of advice is that? Like, oh, my only 3 options are raise, fold, or call. And you're saying I should do all of them. So like, why did I even just watch this? Because it's not sexy. People don't want you to say like the correct distribution, the equilibrium reaches at 40%. It's like no one wants to hear that shit. They want to hear fold, man, because the guy's got the goods, or like he blinked and so he's bluffing, or like that's the sexy stuff, right? The sexy stuff is like it plays out in like a movie, and like there's some cool music. It's not sexy when something is 37.2%. It's not sexy.
No, it's
right?
It's the exact same thing. I mean, I tested as well, right? And I have way too many followers on Twitter, more than I could ever want. But you see the exact same
problems.
Yeah, but you see the exact same thing on Twitter of whether or not someone has a big following or a small following, and you look at like who I think people that provide very, very valuable stuff. They'll show exactly what they're aiming for. They'll have a condition of, if this happens, then I'm out. If this happens, then I'm right. But they'll never say, I'm bullish here, we're flying to the moon, as opposed to someone who provides little to no value, but they have entire certainty, and they say, if this doesn't happen, I delete my account. They get 300 likes, once a week they're right, and they look like a champion. But it's like, it's funny, it's the non-sexy stuff, it's the non-certainty stuff. It's usually, kind of understanding what's a condition that needs to be met. That's what would make this right. That's what would manage the risk. So I think that's probably the vaguest answer I can give, but also probably the most helpful.
I like it.
Yep. 2 more things I wanted to hit on. Since you do come from a poker background, getting away from TA for a little bit, there's a lot of tokens and a lot of project. There's just still a gambling focus in crypto, and decentralized applications have, the most popular ones are dice games and still poker games. And I know a lot of people, I won't name names again just because I don't know if they want to be named, but there's a couple of people that have promoted these gambling dApps or gambling sites that are either poker sites or blackjack sites, and they are crypto sites, right? There's kind of a cool application there where if you weren't actually playing against the house, it was fully transparent. That's kind of a cool use case. Do you see any value in decentralized applications that are focused on gambling or poker or anything like that? Do you plan on any of those sites?
It's unfortunate, man, because when people started to launch Bitcoin-based poker sites or, just like altcoin or like token-based gambling or poker sites, all of this stuff, I was the number one guy to hit up, right? Because I do crypto and I do poker content. Like I'm the guy to hit up, right? If you were trying to make money, hit me up and maybe I can bring all my followers over and like help you out. and I looked at it and I was like, I see no reason for this to exist.
Yep.
Because so here's the thing, like there's this absolute obsession with trying to decentralize everything, and not everything needs to be decentralized, which like I feel like people don't realize, like it's okay for there to be centralized entities that control certain services or products, right? And like online poker should be centralized because they can make a much better user experience. They have an incentive to try and create better games for the people playing. They have an incentive to try and block people from cheating. They have so many reasons why they would want to provide you with the best experience possible. And so like the question becomes, well, what are the upsides to it being decentralized? And the 2 arguments that they always bring up are provably fair, right?
Yep.
Provably fair that it's random. But the thing is, in order for these sites to exist, the licensed ones anyway have to get licensed. And if you're making millions of dollars a year or billions of dollars a year in revenue, why are you going to risk your license to try and make someone be a little more unlucky? It just doesn't make any sense. There's no financial incentive for them to do that. So I'm not really buying that provably fair matters. I think that almost all of these sites are fair. And then the other argument which is a little more fair, I think, is that your funds don't have to be in the hands of these companies,
Sure.
which is a little better. But if we think about even that, we look at the top 10, top 20 biggest poker sites, they all pay everybody out because if they don't, they're going under.
Yep.
And yeah, there have been a few notable exceptions, but even when Black Friday happened, like we talked about earlier today, people got paid out, with the exception of Ultimate Bet, and they got paid out some fraction. But PokerStars and Full Tilt, the two biggest sites, they got paid out. So
And they're still
so
here.
the question,
Those sites are still here now.
well, PokerStars is still here. Ultimate Bet went under. Full Tilt Poker has also gone under. So only PokerStars remains. But it's the biggest one. The point is this: you can't just. This is actually not even just. This doesn't even just apply to poker. This applies to the entire space. You can't just try to create an economy based around a token to solve a problem that isn't a problem. You have to actually solve a problem. If you're not solving a problem, what are you doing? Why does this exist? Why are you there? And the answer is to make money. And so if your business model is, I'm just here doing this to make money and I'm not actually solving anything, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yep. Well, businesses
Right?
are there to make money, but if it creates friction, obviously the frictionless or the more efficient, the better user experience, centralized, poker site is always going to beat the decentralized one. If there, like you said, if there's not a problem to be fixed there, if PokerStars is provably fair and they are incentivized to be fair, whatever the token-based one that just raised $10 million and is trying to get listed on Bittrex, they probably don't stand a chance.
I do think it makes sense to have casino or poker sites where Bitcoin is the currency. I can get behind that. That makes a lot more sense to me.
Well, that exists, right? That's how most of them work.
Those do exist, but I'm more honing in on the token-based sites because there's really two models here, right? There's like the more traditional, like we're basically just a gambling site, but we're going to allow cryptocurrency deposits, and then there's the token-based site. And I've just yet to see a token-based site that makes any sense at all. And so I've just had to reject offer after offer after offer because I'm like, why do you have your token? And no one ever gives me a good answer because the answer is, I want to make more money, but no one wants to say that. So it's just like, we just tiptoe around it until we end the call and then the next one hits me up. And then that's just what we do over and over again. It's like ridiculous.
I can't even imagine how many you get. I get a fair share as well. But it's the reason I'm bringing it up is because there's probably a lot of listeners that are looking to invest in these things. And I think it's strange. For some reason, I mean, the ICO hype and the IEO hype has definitely died down, but for some reason, gambling sites are still like 80% of if a project hits me up and wants me to promote or, says they're launching this new ICO and I should check it out, it's like 8 out of 10, or maybe that's a little bit high, 7, at least the majority are these token-based slot machine sites or this token-based blackjack site or whatever it is. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't even know if that makes it more fair. If anything, I think that actually looks sketchy. So I wanted to bring that up from someone who's been in both worlds and probably sees it a lot more than anyone else.
Yeah, I've not seen. So I think that the sites where like the dice sites where you can invest with Bitcoin, I think that the premise of those all makes sense. Assuming that you find legitimate establishments that aren't going to scam you, because of course, if someone has your Bitcoin, what's the famous saying? Not your private
coin.
key.
Yeah, not your keys, not your coins.
Not your keys, not your Bitcoin or whatever. But putting that aside, I think that model makes sense. But just be wary of the random token models on gambling sites for sure. And I have not really seen any. I've not seen many instances where I think that. At least in gambling, the intersection of gambling and cryptocurrency, I've not seen many good projects. Also, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. I think that's fair. I think that's a good generalization. We don't need to bring up any names, but listener beware, watcher beware of those sites. The last thing I want to bring up, Doug, and then I'm going to let you go is, what are you most excited about going forward? I know content-wise, you're coming back to crypto at least a little bit. You had a gag video I saw you put up like a week ago. You said, the top 5 coins ready to 100x, which is such a hit here on YouTube. That's the clickbait. People still want to make money, and that'll get thousands of views. And it cracked me up because it had nothing to do with your top 5 coins. But you're definitely back to crypto content, at least kind of tiptoeing your way back in. Are you more excited about poker going forward? Because I know you've also taken a little bit of a break from poker, it seems. What's kind of the balance of what you plan to do? Is it like part-time, you're going to be an investor now, and crypto has kind of made you a lifelong investor, or are you going to get back to poker? What's kind of next for you?
This is a great question because I've spent so much of my time thinking about it lately.
Yep.
And I'm just kind of trying to find my way right now because I've done so many videos over the last 3 years. I started YouTube in 2000, mid 2016. I've done like 400 or 500 videos. I think I've done 500 videos. And so like it's just been nice to kind of take some time off, focus on health, kind of just focusing more on just like what I'm doing with my money and all of that. So I don't know, man. Like I definitely so I don't play poker almost at all anymore. In the last
Why is
year, I
that?
think
Is
I
it burned
just
out, or
you know
you've done? I read an article, and obviously these weren't your words, but they said you've accomplished all you came to accomplish. Is that partially true as well?
those actually I think were my words
Oh,
because
okay.
that's really when I set out playing poker when I was 17 or 18 and I'm 30 now. It's like I had all these goals and then I reached all of them and I had financial independence and I just kind of got to this point where it's like it's just too repetitive and I'm not really striving for anything anymore. I'm just kind of like existing. And I just kind of lost that passion to keep doing it. And what I realized is when I would go play poker, I wasn't happy playing. And so I realized that like I think that means it's time to stop playing.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of just like I'm kind of figuring things out. It might be more content. It might be more investing. It might be more. Um, I don't know, man. I really don't know. Like I don't even have a good answer lined up. Like this,
It's all good.
you threw it over to me like, all right, Doug, plug what you're up to, and I'm like, well, here's the thing. I got nothing. No, but I guess I'm trying to figure out what's next for me, and I just want to find something that I'm passionate about because to be frank, what I loved the most about all the cryptocurrency videos was just trolling on those scammers. That was just the funniest stuff, man. And like getting to like warn people and like trying to like save people from the scams and like making fun of all of the stupid ass ways they try to scam people. Oh, it was just so fun. It was just so fun. So I guess like that's why like I always come out of the YouTube woodwork every now and then just to kind of like clown on some people that deserve it. But I'm not totally sure what the future holds. I'm still trying to figure it out one day at a time.
That makes sense. I think anyone can respect that. If I have to ask one more based on that, what do you think the easier table is for you going forward later this year with a Bitcoin? I'll take the call here. I'll take the weight of it. I think Bitcoin looks very good for rest of 2019. I think the global macro environment made it look a little bit better of easing or at least tightening probably won't happen. So easy money is going to continue to be a thing. Stocks can continue to do well, and Bitcoin just popped $1,000 last week. People are more optimistic in 2019. Do you think it's an easier table? And you're obviously a pro poker player, but do you think it's an easier table for you to make money in poker this year or in crypto this year? Regardless of which one you want to focus on, which one do you think you would be more profitable in this year?
Well, it's definitely easier in crypto because you don't have to do stuff that much. You can just hold Bitcoin as a long-term play, and I think you're going to make a lot of money. So tough comparison to say, but I guess I'd side with Bitcoin.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Wanted to get your take there. Doug, thank you so much for coming on, man. Unless you have anything else that you want to throw out, how can people can get in touch with you? Obviously on YouTube, you're big on Twitter. Is there anything else you want to throw out? Shill anything?
No,
All
guys,
right.
honestly, like if you want to follow me over on Twitter, Doug Polk Poker, and if you want to learn about any cryptocurrencies, we have a lot of good articles over on coincentral.com. Got to at least plug my news site. So that's basically it, man. That's really all I got. And I just want to say thank you for having me on today.